What do you think a drummer should never do in a Broadway pit?
The drummer should never be unprepared. Are you referring to any drummer or specifically subs?
Subs, really.
Okay. I mean, I think my answer stands. Just like always be as prepared and put in more time than you think you should and be over prepared. It shows when they're not. Never be unprepared. And I'm going to stick with that answer.
Thank you for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock. If you like what you hear on the show and you want to know more, subscribe to Broadway Drumming 101 at BroadwayDrumming101.com.
Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today is Sam Merrick. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thanks for having me.
I've heard many great things about you and finally got a chance to hear some of your drumming on the And Juliet cast recording.
Yeah.
And of course, some live stuff that I've seen on your website. I really, really love your playing. And one of the things that I want to try to emphasize to people is that most people that come from the music world where they're playing different music like Sharon Jones, or like we just discussed before we started with doing sessions for Charlie Wilson, or many other people that you work with, you've played pop music before, rock, jazz, funk, whatever, and now you're doing Broadway. The reason why I bring that up is because you're doing a show that is specifically pop oriented. I just want to make sure that people understand that it's not the only way to get into a show, but it's definitely helpful if you know how to play all that stuff, and now you're doing it so easily and so excellently. Is that the right word for?
That's the word, yeah.
on such a high level, it's something that, I kind of want to start this podcast episode with, because you're a clear example of what kind of skills I believe are needed and are generally preferred when it comes to doing something like you're doing. But anyway, enough about my ranting at the very beginning.
Yeah, no, I have lots to say about that.
I guess you're from Nashville or DC or Brooklyn.
The last few years have been a bit of a whirlwind in terms of my geography, but I'm from Vermont originally, went to college in Boston, moved to New York, got a bartending gig, kind of started meeting more people, playing more music, and eventually could cut out the bartending stuff and was just playing music full time. And yeah, that's I've just been kind of rolling.
Did you want to go to music school, or did you study something else in college?
I was a communications major in college. I played in high school. I was playing in the jazz band. I did like the district jazz band. I did All-State one year. So I was took music very seriously in high school and devoted a lot of time to it. But I think like wanted to just keep my options open, which as a 17-year-old making that decision seems like a very mature thing to do. But so I just kind of went to school for communications, went to Boston University, and was basically got a journalism degree of sorts, and graduate. I was playing drums all through college, and like was in like a jam band, and like we were playing at the bar every week, and it was a lot of fun. And I met a lot of people from Berkeley when I was there, and then I stuck around Boston for a year, and I was just like bartending and playing in my band. The band kind of dissolved when people started leaving town, and so I had a friend in New York who was already here, who had just randomly had a room open up totally on a whim, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to just come to New York?" And I just said, "Yeah, let's do it." The timing worked out, and so I just like sold my car, I sold a bunch of stuff, and I just like came and got a bartending gig in Times Square, which just so happened to be directly below the old Drummers World shop on 46th Street. And Yeah, I mean, it was just like totally a random series of events, but just ended up meeting a ton of drummers from people coming downstairs and just like having lunch at my bar and just chatting, and then like getting invited to like a little jam session thing here. That kind of got the ball rolling for me in New York.
So looking back, what was your first musical memory?
My father was a bass player, recreational bass player. He was a photographer by trade, but he played in a blues band. And they practiced every Thursday night. And, so it's like the whole band would come and load in all their gear on Thursday nights at the house and play like Stone songs and other like just 60s rock stuff. And yeah, I mean, I was basically the sixth member of the band, just kind of sitting behind the drum set with a little egg shaker, just like.
Did you ever sit in with them, like playing drums with them?
I think I probably did at some point, but it happened at one point in time. I don't think ever on a gig, but maybe at a band practice, I'm sure I sat in at some point. But I actually ended up forming like a little power trio with the guitar player in that band's two sons. We were called the Outlets, and we played like Jimi Hendrix song. I mean, we were probably in sixth grade, and so we kind of like fudged our way through Jimi Hendrix songs, and like what did we play? Played some Green Day songs, and basically all the things that we probably were listening to then. But
were there any drummers that you idolized when you were young?
Yeah. I mean, I was definitely in like a heavy Hendrix phase then. So like Mitch Mitchell was like, he could play all the notes, and he definitely was like the drummer who at that point in time, I was definitely like looking up to and trying to like cop some of his riffs and whatnot. But
did your father sit you down and say, look, listen to this album, Are You Experienced? Check this out. Or were you just influenced by the drummer that was playing with your father?
I would also, I mean, that's a great point, because I was also heavily influenced by the drummer that I could come and see in person every Thursday night for many years. This guy, Chris Kuhn, who was just like really great musical player. And I got my first drum set through him, actually. So this old like 60s Gretsch round badge that I really wish I never sold. But
is that one of the things you sold to get to Boston?
No.
Or to get to New York, I'm saying. I'm sorry.
No, I think I sold that kit like pre-high school, because I was getting way more into jazz in high school, and I think I needed smaller drums. So I think I had gotten some sort of kit at that juncture, but it's long gone, unfortunately. But yeah, I sold like furniture. I sold my car. I mean, I just came to New York without much, and it's kind of how it has to happen sometimes.
So you were in jam bands when you were at Boston College?
Boston University. Yeah.
Boston University, sorry. Were there, was that some of the kind of things that you were aspiring to be? Like, you want to be like Fish or? Oh,
I would have loved that. Yeah. Like I think at that stage, I mean, I was super, super into jazz in high school. And I think by the time I got to college, I started kind of like gravitating into more just like groove based music with an improvisational element. And I think that I kind of just naturally gravitated toward bands like Fish, like Medeski, Martin and Wood, some of those early, or not early, but like the John Scofield bands with Adam Deitch, Lettuce, like bands like that. So that's kind of where I feel like my musical tastes took a big turn. I mean, my band, like listening back now, it's pretty hard to listen to, but yeah, we were having fun. And I think that's at the essence what was important. And we were just playing music and kind of making music that we didn't, we weren't trying to make a hit or anything. We were just trying to like create exciting, energy filled, spontaneous fueled tunes, and it was a lot of fun, and
so
it was a good stage.
If I wanted to find your band from college, can I look on Spotify and find it?
There's not a single record of this band anywhere on the internet, if you can believe it. I think we had a MySpace page, which is I have not even looked at for well over a decade. But we were called The High Rise, and good luck finding anything about that.
Somebody might have some bootleg tapes from a tape that said, when were you in college? What years? In the 90s? 2000s?
This was in early 2000s. So 2006 is, I think, when we made a little EP.
All right, so you wouldn't have I guess you wouldn't have a cassette then. You probably have a... No,
this was post-cassette. But yeah, there's probably at my mother's house in Vermont, there's some box with 100 High Rise CDs.
That's funny. So you moved to New York and you got a bartending gig under Drummer's World, which I really, really, really missed that shop.
Yeah, and there were just, like I said, there were some people, especially the guys who worked at the shop, would come down and have lunch. It was a Cuban restaurant that I worked at, so they would just come down and have lunch, and then one of the guys was like, "Oh, hey, I'm doing this." I forget how it came up, but I played him some recording that I had made back in Boston or something. He's like, "Oh, you do play drums? Cool." And he's like, "Hey, so I every Monday there's this thing at Rose Live in Williamsburg, which was this old club. It's now gone, unfortunately. But basically, yeah, every Monday night there was kind of a soul, R&B, Afrobeat session that was led by this guy Chauncey Yearwood, who also worked at the Drummers World shop, I think, for a little stretch. But yeah, just one of the sweetest people in the world, and great vocalist, great percussionist, great drummer. And he really was so welcoming to new people coming into the fold, and was always I would after my shift on a Monday night, I would take the train out to Williamsburg and go there, and it was always just "Oh, Sam, come sit in and play a song," and he didn't really know me, but he just was so welcoming, and that was the community there. And I can still pretty much trace back 90% of my New York network had somehow stemmed from the connections and friends that I had made at those Soul Survivor sessions at Rose. So that was just a really getting the bartending gig there, meeting Chauncey, meeting Taylor, meeting Dave, and it was all for a very fortuitous stream of events to where I have ended up. So
those sessions where you went and sat in and you met other musicians, what led you to be able to say, you know what, I'm leaving this bartending thing behind. I'm doing the next thing. I'm playing drums full time.
Yeah. Well,
or are you still bartending? No, I'm just kidding.
No. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Because it's a great flexible gig if you can do it and still keep your eye on the prize of playing music. But I guess it was in 2015 that I think I finally just quit the bartending gig, and it wasn't. I had it really good too. I was at the time working in the East Village 2 days a week, and really flexible, really low key bar. I played my own music. It was a really great place to work. But I think, yeah, that was right around the time where I was just basically gone for the whole summer touring with Sharon Jones. And I was just yeah, I think it's time. And I just decided to just do it. And yeah.
You went on tour with Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings. How'd you get connected with them?
I was playing a lot of soul, jazz, organ trio kind of stuff around that period, and through people that I had met at that club, Rose, and we were just doing some local bar gigs, and I think one of the office managers at Daptone would always hang at the bar that we used to play with, and we kind of, we knew him, we were friendly with him, but he knew that like the tour was needing somebody to sub for the summer. It was a tour, like national tour opening for the Tedeschi Trucks band. Yeah, playing some big venues. And so anyways, he asked me if I wanted to audition. And so I went, and like one afternoon and just played, I think like 5 or 6 songs with the Dap Kings at the studio in Bushwick. And got the gig and went out that summer. And up to, that was like the biggest thing I had done up to that point in my career. And I got my butt kicked, man. It was a hard gig. It was a really hard gig.
In what way?
Well, musically, it taught me just like coming into like a completely new, unfamiliar circumstance where I didn't really know anybody. Sharon was just she was an amazing band leader, but just like really knew what she wanted in terms of tempos and things. And like, they kind of varied from night to night, depending on kind of how she was feeling. And like, basically like the normal drummer who plays on all the records, Homer, he basically was like, yeah, just like watch Sharon's feet. Like they'll tell you everything you need to know. And like, that band also just like, they kind of, everything was very calculated, but also very loose at the same time. And so if I can explain that, like, there's just going to be like the part and the groove and the way that everything's locking is so specific, but the times in which like the length of sections and just like how we're going to end songs and where we're just going to like, drop it on one, it was all very fluid depending on how Sharon was moving. And it was just like keeping your eyes glued on her and keeping your eyes glued on the MD, who was just like, could at any moment just like stomp his foot, and you just got to drop the one and bring down the dynamics, or just like when a song will end, when like a next section will begin. It was like that, those things were fluid from night to night. And so, just coming into those circumstances, not really knowing anybody personally, not like, rolling with a band who has been basically like road dogging it hard for over a decade, and they're just like a tight knit group of guys, and me being like the young new guy, it was just a lot. Did you get hazed when you first got in? Did they were like, oh, we got a new guy? No, there was no hazing. No, everyone was cool. But I think like socially though, I mean, it was a harder situation to go into, because again, like it was like a group of like guys who have spent thousands and thousands of hours together in a van for years, and I'm just like this new like bright-eyed kid, like this is funky, cool. Like I don't know.
Oh man, what the music was great, and sad to see her pass.
I know. It was hard, and but I got the opportunity to play with other Daptone bands for the next few years, and did a couple dates with Charles in 2017. Charles Bradley did a long Europe tour with Sharon's backup singers, Saun and Starr, who had put out a record on Daptone. Just like other Daptone adjacent projects popped up. And that was actually how one of the sessions with Charlie Wilson came up, was through that. So
coming from the whole Dap Kings family, after a while you said, you know what, I want to do Broadway. Or how'd you wind up getting honestly, I kind of stumbled into it. Because I guess at this point it was around 2017. Yeah, and I was just, I had done some fun tours, and I think I was teaching a lot of lessons at the time, and I think I was just, I don't know, just looking for whatever the next thing might be. And I was also playing in like club date bands, and I was on a gig at some country club in Westchester, and it was my first time playing with this band, and I got chatting with the guitar player, and he had actually just gotten the touring Hamilton gig for the Angelica tour.
It's like, oh man, amazing, congrats. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to get into that world at some point. I don't really, I know a few guys who do it, but like, I don't know if like the subbing thing is, I don't really know how any of this stuff works. I'm very green. And he's like, oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, so-and-so. Anyways, so we were chatting a bit, and, the next day I get a Facebook message from this guitar player, and he says, hey, I think the Hamilton Philip tour is looking for a drummer still. I could refer you to the contractor if that was something you might be interested in. And I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, that would be incredible. I know nothing about that world, but like, yeah, I would love to have a job. That sounds fantastic. So yeah, and I didn't hear anything for a few weeks, and I reached back out to the guitar player. I was like, hey, was I supposed to hear anything? He's like, oh, I don't know. Here's the guy's contact. Just like text him. And so I reached out to the contractor directly, and he had also just happened to get my name from somebody else for some non-Broadway related music event thing. And so I think I was on his radar a little bit, but he's like, oh yeah, sure. Here's the audition material. And so I basically did five songs from Hamilton. I recorded myself in my studio, just drums and click, playing the ink, submitted it. I was just like, we'll see how this goes. And then I was out of town playing a few weeks later, and I get this random phone call, and I'm like, I don't know who this is. And so I pick it up, and it's Alex Lackamore calling me. And I was like, oh, Alex, hi. Yeah. And he's like, Sam, hey, I saw your audition, and I was really impressed, and I don't really have any notes for you. Like, clearly you can play the ink and like make it feel good, but I do want you to show me that you can have fun with this music. So can you just like do another round and just like record yourself like having fun playing it, which could mean a lot of things. But, I just kind of assumed that he just kind of wanted some sauce in certain places and just like kind of do my thing a little bit and just kind of stretch in certain moments, which so I did. I submitted it, and, 3 weeks later, yeah, I got the gig. So that's kind of how the Hamilton thing came about. That was the fall of 2017.
So what's the biggest difference initially that you've noticed playing with bands like Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, or playing club dates, or just playing in bars in other venues in New York City, as opposed to playing in a Broadway show where you got 5 snare drums and triggers and cymbals everywhere, and looking at a screen, looking at the conductor? What do you find? What did you see the biggest differences were?
The specificity of what you're playing in Hamilton is obviously on a different level from any of those kind of gig situations you named. Like, I mean, it's like that show in particular is highly, highly specific in terms of like what notes you play, what notes you don't play, dynamics, orchestrations around the kit for fills. Like over the years, I've kind of found my little Easter eggs where I can like, stray from the ink a little bit, but coming into that situation, it was like, oh, you do this thing one way. And I was always coming from the school of, if I feel like I want to play a fill a certain way, I go for it. And like, I hit it hard, and like, this is how it's going to be. And Broadway in general, and especially Hamilton, was not that. And so yeah, I honestly didn't know if I could play a full show of the ink and like do that thing. I didn't know if I was capable of it truly, because I was always into a lot of improvisational music, and like things like I very much like followed my my musical intuition in kind of all musical scenarios. And this was one where it was like, you kind of just had to separate that for a bit and just, and do what this particular job required of you, and only that. And so, yeah, that was a big adjustment. And, yeah, it was a learning experience. And I mean, that book is, infamous for just being super specific and really hard, and, clicks dropping in and out, and a lot of conductor following, which I also hadn't really had much experience with. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely the most challenging thing I had done in my musical life up until that point, for sure.
Where was your first show?
The tour opened in Seattle in January 2018, and it's just like, you just suddenly, your life, I'm just leaving New York, I'm just gone, and we just like end up in Seattle. I was like, all right, I guess I'm here now. And it's a very strange reality that you suddenly have to grapple with. But we started in Seattle. I recommended one of my good friends and amazing bass players, Jordan Scannella, for the gig, and he auditioned and got the gig. So I was on this journey with like my good buddy and, and musical partner, rhythmic counterpart. So that, I think, made the whole situation, put me a little bit more at ease, just having some familiar people in my camp. But, anyways, yeah. So it was just like 2 days of rehearsal in Seattle in the lobby of the theater. And then we did a sits probe, and then we're off to the races. Dress rehearsals, tech, the whole thing. I mean, it was a massive, massive life shift, and I welcomed it, honestly, because like I said, at that point in my life, I was like, I had done some fun tours. I had some teaching things. I was playing some fun gigs, but I was just like, okay, what's the next thing? And that next thing came along in the form of Hamilton, and so I definitely like embraced the road thing. I didn't have a partner at the time, and there was all the reasons to go on tour were good ones. And I was like, oh yeah, this makes total sense. But the reasons for being on tour, the reason for it being a really difficult thing to do is, yes, you are just gone. And this is not like a rock tour where you go away for 6 weeks and then you come home and then you're like in your space. And no, you are just straight up gone. And Hamilton, especially, it's like there are no layoffs. So it's, a lot of touring shows, they'll have like, you'll be out for 3 or 4 months and then you'll have 2 weeks off, 2 weeks layoff. But this show was not that, because at that time it was like the new hot thing on the road. And so it was a hot ticket. So every city, we were going, and we were just doing every city without breaks. And, so yeah, I was just gone, and that was hard to grapple with over time, just because it's like you kind of lose your feeling like you're losing your value in the musical marketplace, so to speak. All the friends and your musical family in New York you're gone from, and you miss a lot of holidays with family. But I guess let's just say that like when I left Hamilton a few months ago, it was the right time to do so. And I was, I left feeling really grateful for the gig. I mean, it really changed my life, honestly. I met my current partner on the show. She worked for the company as well. And we've been together for 4 years, and I was able to buy a house, just things like that I just I didn't really know. I didn't think were possible for me at that point, prior to Hamilton. And so yeah, I mean, I think more good came out of that experience than anything. So
how many Hamilton tours are there?
It started out with 2, and there was one sit down in Chicago and one sit down in San Francisco. Chicago has since closed. San Francisco has turned into a tour. So technically right now there are 3 touring Hamilton companies, 2 of which are closing in the spring. And so the Philip Company, which was which was my company, is going to be the one that continues onward.
That's so interesting. All these connections. So, yes, I played Ain't Too Proud, and the drummer that does the podcast for Working Drummer, the Working Drummer podcast, is going out and playing Ain't Too Proud because Q left the Ain't Too Proud tour that
took over my chair. Yeah, it's a whole shuffle.
So now it makes sense. I was like, wait a minute. Now I'm putting all this stuff together. So you left that tour 2 months ago, which Q took over, and now you're doing And Juliet, which is contracted by my good buddy Mike Aarons.
Yeah. And the And Juliet came about that one of my oldest musical collaborators is this guy Dominic Falacaro, who's the MD of And Juliet and one of the orchestrators. He co-orchestrated the whole and arranged the show with Bill Sherman, who also had worked on Hamilton and In the Heights and a slew of other things. But Dominic and I we go way back because we had played in bands together in New York in like 2009 and made a lot of records together basically until I left for Hamilton. And so the timing of the whole thing just kind of really worked out. It was very lucky how all the stars aligned for like with the time when I was leaving Hamilton, or even when I was looking to leave Hamilton and Juliet starting to gain some momentum in terms of a Broadway run and to do that. So, but I'm back in New York. So it's been a wild ride.
So that person who was it again?
His name's Dominic Falacaro. He's a piano player, producer, and he's the MD for And Juliet.
Did you do any of the out-of-town tryouts for this show?
I didn't. So And Juliet was running in London, and still it opened right before the pandemic. I think they opened in November of 2019, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, they're still running in London, and I wasn't involved in any of that. But for the North American company and the company that's now on Broadway, I only did the pre-Toronto, which was the pre-Broadway city. I only did the pre-Broadway rehearsals, which happened to be in New York this past summer. Because at that point we didn't have a theater, we didn't have a date to open on Broadway, so they basically there was no reason to take me to Toronto and have to deal with a Rule 24 situation and do all that. So I only did the rehearsals for the pre-Broadway run, and then and then the next time I kind of linked up with the crew was basically in August to do the cast recording. Which
brings me to that specific topic of the cast recording. When I was doing some research on you and trying to find out more about you online, I heard the cast recording and I was just like, man, this sounds really, really, really good. And your playing is excellent and it's authentic. And one of the things that we talked about before we started recording is how knowing certain genres and being familiar with them and knowing how they, how the language of certain styles of music can assist you with a Broadway show, especially something like And Juliet, because it's primarily pop music, and knowing how to play that stuff authentically makes your job and the music director's job and trying to explain things to you much easier to you. When you were recording the cast recording, were you trying to emulate the songs, and trying to get them as close to the original songs as possible? And during that process, did you have various drum sets that you were using to get different sounds, different snare drums? Like, how did that whole recording process go?
Yeah. I'll answer the first part of that question. So basically, there was some template in place when I went to the studio because there was a London cast recording that had been made. So there was some sort of blueprint made. And for most of the songs, we were playing along to, like, they muted the drums and the bass track, and the bass player and I went in and did the first 3 days of the sessions. But we were basically playing along to some of the tracks that the London band had cut. So like there was already some sort of framework there, and like based on like what that drummer had done, I had some ideas, you know, some baseline of like what this needs to be and what this is supposed to sound like. So I can't say that I was going in and flying totally blind. That said, I think, and this is from, you know, working with Dominic for many years and kind of knowing what he gravitates toward sonically and energy and just intention wise. He just really likes when the drummer is just laying into it and like playing and you know, he said, he's like, these songs are like, you know, they're like, a lot of the songs are from the late 90s and like they were recorded in the box. And so what's going to make this show work is if like the drums are just going ham the whole time and playing bombastically and just really bringing that fire that's needed, because that's the thing that translates into the audience and makes this feel exciting. And that energy really has the energy that I bring to it really has an effect on the overall audience experience of the show. So anyway, so that session, I basically kind of, I mean, I dialed back some things for the sake of this, we're making a record here. But yeah, I mean, there were some songs that I was just like, we're just going for these big fills and these big ramp ups into choruses and just kind of, again, I keep using the word going for it, but like, it was kind of the name of the game.
So as far as the drums that you used and the different snares, I noticed there were various sounds that you were getting. Was that something that you brought in snares, or they had different snares, or did they just...
No, we used there's like 29 tracks. I think for almost 25 of them, we used one drum set, and it was an old Ludwig that was just at the power station. That's like, it was so big. It was the big, yeah. It was very funny. I was not used to playing drums this big, because the kick was 24. It was rack was 13. Floor toms were 16, 18. And yeah, I mean, I basically used those drums on all but maybe 4 tracks for the session. I joke with Dominic and Bill about this, but yeah, I definitely made a point to try to want to play some smaller drums just to see what happened. But it just like the kind of the breakneck pace of that whole session was just, there was just no time to just, you know, break down a kit and then set up a new kit. You know, I mean, I basically had 3 days, and the whole first day we were just getting sounds. Like we tracked 2 songs in the first day, which meant that we needed to do 27 songs in the next 2 days. So it was just like 3 takes next, 3 takes next, overdub cymbal next. Like it was like that. So there wasn't a lot of time to be switching out kits, but we did switch out snare drums quite often. And there's a couple tracks where the producer of the record, or I should say the co-producer of the record and the engineer, who is basically like Max Martin's kind of like right-hand man in all things instrument and vocal recording in a lot of his projects. He wanted some towels on the drums for a couple tracks. He had a very specific idea of what he was looking for sonically. But there were snare drums that were definitely switched out quite often. And but the main kit itself, I mean, even the cymbals, it just, I played the kind of the same setup the whole time.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
24-inch bass drum. My God, it's big.
I know. I was very tired at the end of every day. Trying to move enough air. Like, I mean, you have to work 30% harder to move the air for drums that size, to get the right sounds and tones, as you know. And so, yeah, I was exhausted after it. I couldn't even see straight by the end of that last day.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you record the cast album before you opened?
Yes. Yeah, we recorded it in August. So we basically did 2 days of rehearsals with the band at a rehearsal studio, just to kind of get familiar with the music and just meet each other. And then 2 days later, we're just in the studio cutting it.
Now, I have a question for you. I guess this is your first cast recording, which a lot of people haven't had the fortune to have the ability to record on a cast record, but you've done one. Now that you've been doing the show for a while, do you feel that if you went back and recorded it again, it'd be a lot different or better?
Oh, it'd be so much better. I mean,
I hate that feeling because, I think it's happened to me maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
And you listen back, you're like, oh, man, what I do now is so much better than
I know, man. I'm like, oh, I could have just made that thing feel better. I would have chosen a different thing here. I mean, we can drive ourselves nuts just thinking about that. But there is something to be said for just like that snapshot of time was captured. And, I think the level is still pretty high and it sounds incredible. So it's like, yeah, this is cool. This is what it is. This is a vibe. And I think the importance was just that the energy was there. The intention was there. Yeah. Listening back to it now, I mean, I hear some stuff. I'm just like, oh God, I wish I just knew how this thing was supposed to feel a little bit better. And just like, we can drive ourselves nuts saying coulda, shoulda, woulda, but yeah, I'm pretty proud of it, the way it turned out. And, people seem to dig it. And, I mean, my kit for the show is also just totally different than the kit that I had recorded all the tracks on. I mean, I'm using definitely a more like modern drum, like pearl maple gum kit, 10, 12, 14, 16, 3 snares, a lot of bunch more cymbals. Like it's a pretty serious rig. It's just like a totally different approach.
Are you playing electronics in the pit too?
Yeah. I have a bunch of triggers, SPDX. Doing it all the bleeps and bloops.
So you are on Broadway now. It's 8 shows a week. Now you were on tour since 2017, right?
Early 2018. Yeah.
Early 2018 until 2 months ago. Obviously, there was a little blip of time that you weren't, but you were doing the same thing for so long and you never took a day off, did you?
No, I mean, we had a couple weeks of vacation every year, but yeah, I mean, you're doing the Ocho if you're on the road.
The Ocho.
There's no the Hateful Eight. There's just no way around it. Cause especially for a book like Hamilton, if you need a sub and your tour is in Des Moines, it's not like a thing that the average or really even exceptional players can just go in and sight read, So anyways, so we do all 8 every week, kind of week after week. And it's a grind. It's a mental grind. It's a physical grind. So now on Broadway, to not necessarily have to do that if I don't want to is a pretty mind blowing change.
So I was gonna bring that up. You don't have to be there. What would you call it? The Hateful Eight or doing the Ocho?
The Ocho, yeah.
You've done the Ironman course on the road. Now you're coasting. Now you got somebody's bringing you along in a rickshaw. You're like, man, I made it. I'm cool now. Now, when you're on Broadway, you can take off up to 50% of these shows and do other things to basically get your mind off of what you're doing at the show and stay in the marketplace and just do other things musically. It's a very good perk. Since you didn't take off when you're at Hamilton and you can take off when you're at and Juliet, have you started to think about who you're going to possibly hire as a sub and what you're going to be looking for?
Yeah. I have the book out to some guys, and I've had a guy come in and do the show already. I have another one doing 2 shows this weekend, just to get them in the rotation and just getting them up to speed. I mean, in this era where, you can come in and then get a test positive for COVID, for instance, like that's like, you need to have people, and it's just the kind of the new reality that we all have to kind of grapple with. And so I've made it a point to kind of get people up to speed and get in there early. Just because, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than to have to cancel a show because there's no drums. So yeah, as for this, so this show's, I think, a little unique in terms of what I'm looking for and what I know that the music team is looking for. And I know I spoke a lot about during we're doing the album recording process about energy and intention and laying into it and just like going for it, musically speaking. And I've reached out to people who I know are like really capable of that. Like, like there are some fills in the show and some moments that are orchestrated and written in the ink because they have to be a certain way based on choreography, based on, a slew of other factors. But there's a lot in the show that is kind of open for interpretation. Like it's just slashes. It's like, how do you want to lead into this chorus? Play a big fill here, and like I encourage my subs and people learning the book to be like, yeah, like if you if you're unsure, just like play what I play, and you can come in and just be a mirror of me in the pit. And I think that's the typical Broadway sub ethos, is just be a mirror image of the guy who holds the chair. Now for Anne Juliet, I think like, again, like this show requires a certain level of energy and spontaneity and explosiveness that has to be conveyed from the drum chair. And, there's more that, like, it's pop music. There's a lot of different ways to play like a big rock Bonham-y fill going into this section, and like I called guys who I knew whose musical intuition that I trusted and really respected. So, and I tell them, I'm like, look, like I've highlighted in orange on the score the things that you have to do. You have to play this ink. But, these slashes in this other moment, like I want you to like stretch a little bit. I want you to like lay into it and like follow your musical your musical intuition, because that's what this show calls for.
What do you think a drummer should never do in a Broadway pit?
The drummer should never be unprepared. I think that is, I mean, are you referring to any drummer or specifically subs?
Subs, really.
Okay. I mean, I think my answer stands. Just like always be as prepared and put in more time than you think you should and be over prepared. Like, and it shows when they're not. Never be unprepared. And yeah, I think, I'm going to stick with that answer.
What advice would you give to someone that's interested in playing on a Broadway tour or a Broadway show?
My advice would just to be fluent in different styles and learn how to play them authentically. Like I feel like what MDs and orchestrators and contractors are looking for these days are people who can, again, like create energy in the room through playing, through their drumming, and, like having, like, we all know that like the mixes in a lot of Broadway shows are not super favorable towards the band and definitely more for the vocals. But like given that, if you can be a drummer who like really just brings energy and brings fire and plays with intention and authenticity to that style, whatever that may be, I think that will probably get you hired. Like, people don't want someone necessarily who is just like only into boom chick and theatery kind of stuff. They want people who can like lay into some rock things and make it feel really good for the rest of the band. And And honestly, I don't think that kind of advice is that different from just like being a good working drummer in general. I really don't think it's that different. And being able like to work in Broadway and to do the thing, and it's definitely a certain skill set that requires you to know how to like follow a conductor and to do those things and like really know how to play in ink. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to just playing with intention and playing with authenticity and like making things feel good, making things groove, making things feel good. I mean, that to me is paramount.
Say, for instance, the show and Juliet closes in the year 2052 and you're still playing it.
That'd be great.
Would you say, you know what, I want to go work for the New York Times if it's still around? Journalism, since you studied that.
Listen, I'm open to a lot of things. I mean, in the pandemic when things were looking pretty bleak and for live music and theater and things, like I took up like kind of a tech support job, and I did it when I was on the road a few hours a day just because I had time. And so I'm not opposed to like some career pivots in any way. I mean, I think it's healthy. Makes you appreciate going in and playing drums a little bit more.
The person that you were in Vermont going to Boston University.
Yeah.
And said, you know what, I want to do this over again. What would you change?
I wish I was a little bit more, looking back, I wish I had a little bit more discipline in terms of practicing and like really working on the drums from a technical perspective. I feel like I gained a lot by just playing music for the fun of it, and versus going to school. I think there's something to be said for nobody telling you how to do one thing or another, but there is an element of just, I wasn't ever like forced to go into a practice room for 3 hours and be like, no, I have to learn this solo and read it note for note. And I have like stuff like that. Like I never did that. And I think as I'm working today, I feel like I'm not the strongest reader overall, but I feel so there's like things that like I wish I did back then. So those tasks now would be a lot easier. But as far as my trajectory of going to non-music school and doing what I did, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't change anything, I don't think.
So
I feel good about that.
So to a young person that's in high school and they're like, you know what, I need to go to Berkeley, I need to go to Juilliard, I need to go to University of North Texas, I need to go to USC, I need to study music, I need to study theater in order to be on Broadway, because that's all I want to do is do exactly what Sam Merrick is doing. Would you say, no, kid, don't do that. Go out and play and play with be the new drummer for Dave Matthews Band, which I don't know what happened to Dave Matthews Band, by the way. I'm sorry for going off on a tangent. Are they still around?
Oh, they're still playing arenas, and Carter Beaufort is still ruling.
Really?
Okay. Yeah.
Good.
But yeah, I if a young kid came to me, and I wouldn't discourage them from going to music school, because I think some people need that structure, and I think it's probably healthy. I would say don't take out a lot of student loans to do it if you are going to do it. Do not do that. That's one thing I'd give a hard no to, but and I also would say probably don't study theater. Go study jazz performance. Study. I don't know, anything that, like, again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying about just learning all of these other styles very authentically. Like study like the things that make music feel good, and like try to like find that thread, because if you do find yourself in a theater setting, your ability to do that at a high level, I think trumps your ability to thrive. Like it's more important to know how to do that than to just like be familiar with a lot of classical theater musicals and knowing how to, play chimes correctly. Musical theater in today's day and age just knowing how to play drums at a high level and making things feel good and play with intention trumps everything else.
I say this all the time to a lot of people that I interview. Amen.
Yeah. I feel like if there's anything I miss a lot about playing music, it's playing in a live environment and like seeing people in a room. And now that I'm back in New York and able to kind of sub, I'm hoping to kind of get into more of that and to kind of reconnect with that kind of just playing in a room with people. And because I've been basically with the exception of maybe like 2 or 3 gigs in the last 5 years, I've just played in a pit in a box, in my home studio. But that's so hoping to have some fun and play music with friends. I think that's what it all comes down to.
What kind of gear do you use in your pit?
Yeah. I endorse Pearl drums and Vic Firth sticks and All Claire audio in-ears. So I use all those things in the pit. And Big Fat Snare Drum. Gotta give them a shout too. But I have a 7. Well, I have a maple gum pearl kit. Toms are 10, 12, 14, 16. I have a reference pearl snare drum that's 20 ply maple, super heavy, loud, cracking drum as my main snare. And I have a kind of a 14x8 big fat snare that I use from time to time, and also a piccolo snare, all pearl. And and I have a collection of Zildjian cymbals that I like, mostly Ks that I just love, and I use a bunch of external trigger pads to trigger some sounds. So not every electronic sound lives on the SPDS unit. And if anybody wants to check out my Instagram, you'll find that kit posted in a few places. So, but yeah, the rig is very fun, and my 16-year-old self, when I walk into work, still giggles a little bit because it's large, and I love it.
That's cool, man. That's cool. So you also work on various other things at home. You have a home studio and you record samples. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I landed. My tour was in Toronto when everything shut down, and I had at this point given up my apartment in New York. So my partner and I landed in suburban Maryland, outside DC, at her family's house, and so they had a room in the basement that was just kind of empty. And so I drove up to New York one afternoon and went to my storage spot and just grabbed all my drums and all my recording stuff and drove it back down. And so I had a little setup in this room for a bit, and we were in this house for basically 11 months. And so I had, after being on the road for 2.5 years straight, I finally had like all my gear in one place and just like all the time in the world to just like track drums and work on recording and do that thing. And I kind of started collaborating with a good buddy of mine, another producer who I played a lot of music with and worked a lot with in New York before I left with Hamilton. And he had been making sample packs of like keyboard patches and different synth wave files that he would put in these bundles and sell on this website. And so he wanted to do a drum break pack with me. So what I would do is just, we needed about 30 kind of motifs per bundle. And so it'd be 30 folders of about 10 or so 2-bar loops of, same basic beat, but like varying fills, and just like different variations throughout. So, I mean, and some packs are more geared to songwriting, where it'd be like 2 of the loops would be just me playing a simple hi-hat pattern with just kick drum and then adding a snare, and then maybe like, I don't know, just varying it up the slightest bit, maybe to the ride for a chorus effect. And so anyways, yeah, so I made a lot of these packs, which the series is called Break Habits, and we have them for sale on the drumbroker.com. And yeah, it was a cool experience. And so I would record them all at home, and use a couple different snare drums, couple different drum sets, different muffling techniques, and then I would send basically a bunch of Pro Tool files to my friend, and he would kind of mix everything and run it through all his analog gear and tape machines in Brooklyn and edit, and then so we had this product, and it was cool. It was a nice little money generator for a while, and also something to keep me busy, and getting to spend that kind of time in the studio was like invaluable, especially at that point after being on the road so long.
Do you have a studio at your place in New York?
I don't. I have a studio at my house in Nashville that where my partner lives, and so all my stuff is kind of there currently, and I try to go back as much as I can, but so yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to be in a place where I can have two studios, but yeah, that's where most of my gear lives right now.
Where can people find you on social media?
Instagram. That's kind of the only place I exist in social media. At Sam Hit Drum is my handle. But I also have a website, www.sammerrickmusic.com. And there's you can learn about all my shenanigans there, and yeah.
No TikTok?
I haven't reached that world yet.
Well, for anyone that wants to see Sam, well, you're not going to actually see him play. Are you on stage at all in the show?
We're not on stage, no. But okay. We do get a bow at the end, so you might see my face at the end of the show.
So if you want to see Sam Merrick play during the bow, or hear him play, you can see him at the Sondheim Theater at 124 West 43rd Street in New York City for the show and Juliet. Thank you very much, Sam Merrick, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with me about Broadway.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, well, thank you for doing what you do, and yeah, thanks for having me.
To continue producing the high-quality podcast you're listening to, publishing engaging newsletter content, and posting YouTube videos, we would appreciate any financial contributions you can make. At this time, we have no advertisers, and we'd like to keep it that way. Our staff is small but growing. We can only produce a show with listener contributions from people like you. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual subscriber at BroadwayDrumming101.com. You can also contribute any amount you wish through PayPal at paypal.me/BroadwayDrumming101 or through Venmo at Broadway Drumming 101. Or help keep us caffeinated by buying us a cup of coffee or a week's worth at buymeacoffee.com/BD101. That's buymeacoffee.com/BD101. We appreciate any support you can give. Don't forget to subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page. You'll find more content that isn't featured on the podcast or on the Broadway Drumming 101 Instagram page. Make sure when you subscribe to the YouTube page, you click on the button to be notified when a new video is published. Be sure to visit our new shop at merchandise.broadwaydrumming101.com. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.